gentlemen. Hey, I think that this is a great group, and I'm really impressed. You're a good-looking group of people, and whatever I can do to help you succeed, I'm going to do it. And I want to comment a little bit about the panel that went before us, because I heard two things that I want to mention, and one of them leads into what I'm going to talk about. But the first one is somebody said, you're going to see things that you never had to deal with before. You will, but you know what? You can handle it. You got this far, stick together, everything is solvable. You know, when they tried to close down Harborside with the forfeiture action, everybody said this is the end of cannabis in California. And you know what? We weren't ready to quit. We fought back, and we have won. Now, the next thing that was said that leads into what I and Hank are going to speak about is that with what's coming, taxation is going to be a big part of it. And you should get that message loud and clear, because it is going to be a big part of it. And the IRS is not a friend to the cannabis movement. The state of California is willing to work with us, but the IRS is just adamantly opposed. It's the same story that you hear from everybody in the federal government. They're not willing to face reality. They still look at cannabis as a drug. They won't reschedule it, and they are just out to lunch. But it's something we have to deal with. And when Tawny asked me to speak here today, I said, well, what is it that you would like me to talk about? And she said, well, I don't know, what do you think? She said, it's the Sonoma County Growers Association. And I said, well, most of the growers that find their way into my office come because they haven't filed tax returns for a number of years, and they've decided that it's time to address that issue. So I agreed to talk about filing delinquent tax returns. Not the most interesting subject, but certainly one of the most important ones for anybody that I'll try to make it interesting, but it's certainly a big issue for somebody that hasn't done it. And, you know, for people that haven't filed their tax returns, there are many reasons why that occurred. A number of years ago, if you were a grower, well, you know, it wasn't really legal, and, you know, this is an underground economy, and you don't want to report all that money, so you didn't. Or something else happened and you didn't file a tax return. Whatever the reason is that after you miss that first year, it becomes easier to keep not filing and not filing and not filing because of the fear of having to go back and address it. But there are many reasons to address it, and one of them is the coming legalization of cannabis. And by the way, this is sort of like I'm swimming against the tide, but I say this every opportunity I get. Let's try to stay away from the term recreational use. It's adult use. It's responsible adult use. That will sell better to people that are on the fence than telling them that this is recreational. You don't go out and drink recreationally. You don't use cannabis recreationally. Okay? Now, one of the reasons that you want to address this issue is that I think that it's likely that the state is going to regulate and license growers. And they're going to want to see that you are, like just if you try to open up a dispensary, they're going to want to see that your house is in order before they let you do that. So if you can't show them tax returns for the past few years, you're going to have a problem. And you want to get licensed or whatever mechanism they use, because that guarantees you the ability to continue to do what you've been doing and fought so hard to obtain. Now, if you haven't filed your tax returns, what can you do about it? Well, actually, the IRS does have what they call the voluntary disclosure policy. And what that means in English is that if you're not already of interest to the IRS and you file delinquent tax returns, they won't use those tax returns to file criminal charges against you for failing to file. So if you file your delinquent returns before you get an audit notice or an inquiry from the IRS, you come under the voluntary disclosure umbrella. And it's a good umbrella to be under. Now, One of the things, and I think Hank will agree with me on this, is that if you haven't filed tax returns and you've decided that it's time to address that, your natural inclination would be to go to an accountant and talk to them about it. That would not be a good move. It would not be a good move because there is no accountant-client privilege. There is only an attorney-client privilege. So if you go to an attorney, part of the difficulty in addressing delinquent returns is reconstructing the income. And it's a difficult process, but for people that know how to do it, it can be done. But in doing that, you're going to make a lot of disclosures that could, if somebody were subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury, come back to haunt you. However, if you hire an attorney and then you have the attorney hire the accountant to work with him or her, that accountant will then come under the attorney-client umbrella. Whatever you tell them will be privileged because they're working for the attorney, not for you. They're assisting in your representation. And that's what gives you the protection, and that's what's so important. And then, of course, you're covered by the attorney-client privilege. And then what you have to do is get down to work and start to figure out how to go about reconstructing income. And the attorney and the accountant working together should be able to do that. The important thing is to be able to capture all of the income that the IRS is going to find if they do audit you. Remember, even though the voluntary disclosure policy says that they won't use those delinquent returns as the basis of a criminal case, it doesn't mean you can't be audited. And the one thing that you absolutely don't want to have happen is to sort of just file some bogus returns to get it off your chest that don't accurately report your income. Because if they audit those returns, then you moved up into the category of tax evasion because you filed a false return. So you want to make sure that you capture all of the income, and Hank is going to tell you how to do that.
I'm the straight man. So let me just go back a little bit. I mean, I've got people coming to my office all the time, and they want to know, the questions I get all the time are, when should I file? How far back should I go? And is it okay to show assets that I bought in prior years? Just put it on the tax return. I don't want to get too much into technical stuff. If you're what's called a sole proprietor, you do a Schedule C, you have to actually show your assets on any return, actually. So anyway, I have to answer this question a lot, and in terms of, I file a lot of tax returns. I obviously feel a lot more comfortable with people. I'm going to report all their income, whatever year they choose to start with. If they come to me and they say, Hank, I want you to help me reconstruct my income for the first year I want to do it. So let's say tomorrow I go into my office, someone says, I want to reconstruct I want to file a tax return for 2014. So anyway, you're a little late, you didn't extend, but that's okay. And I want to report, I want to be honest, I want to say exactly, I can help you do that. I think that what Henry's talking about is where we feel it's a little bit of intuition. If a client begins to say, no, I don't, I'd like to go back, I don't really want to report all my income, then I think then we get into a case where you probably should go see an attorney. Whether an attorney actually can help somebody create a return that may not be accurate, if they know it, I don't know, is that ethical? Can you do that?
Absolutely not. I thought where you were going with this. Is this a setup?
That's our client fraud section. Yeah, and also if that happens, attorney-client privilege would be waived for the crime fraud exception. Yeah. So definitely not.
So someone.
I think maybe this is where you're really going with this. If somebody comes in and says, look, I haven't filed returns for 3 years, I think I've been making $50,000 a year. I say, okay, that's great. So tell me, what have you bought in the last 3 years? Well, I bought 2 new cars, I went on a vacation to Mexico, I sent my kid to private school in New York, and You know, and then the usual cost of living. And I'm thinking, you know, that's not $50,000 a year, buddy. Come on, let's get real. And you have to sit down and have that kind of conversation. Because, look, I'm more than happy to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. And I think some people come in and it is pretty hard after a number of years, especially if you're successful, to sort of bite that tax bill. I mean, it's hard to do. And probably the only assurance that a lawyer can give you or an accountant can give you and still be ethical is that you have a duty to report everything. But based on my experience in the criminal tax area, I at least know how to figure out how to capture all of the assets that they're going to be able to find. And you know, a lot of growers have been making their deposits in the backyard. And you know, and that's okay. But when they start to spend those deposits is when they can start to get into trouble. So,
So
and we're not talking about people that are late that didn't get an extension. We're talking about people that haven't filed for 3 or 5 years.
So you wanted me to talk about the reconstruction of income. So there's two ways to reconstruct your income. One is to do it forwards, one is backwards. I mean, the forwards way, Henry was alluding to, I think, what I call the backwards way. Is that, well, I needed to have, I had these expenses, I had the vacation, I had the kid in private school, I had these medical expenses, you know, I had these housing costs, whatever. So you back into it. And that's kind of the net income, and then you kind of work up from there. The forward way is, and I've done this a lot, is you sit down and you say, well, you know, what income did you have? What did you sell? What did you produce? Let's talk about it. You know, what do you think you spent? And even if it was in cash, you know, you reconstruct it like that. And then, I mean, it's best to obviously to do it both forwards and backwards. You know, you can do it. I mean, I try to get clients to do the forwards way, and then I say, okay, now let's work the backwards way and see if it makes sense. I mean, the IRS, you know, where the IRS is going to find you first, they're probably not going to find people who grow cannabis this way, but normally they'll find, you know, there's matching, you know, a lot of 1099s are out there, or 1098s if you pay a mortgage. And California actually is, even though they don't cooperate with, they don't conform with the 280E issue, which I can talk about a little later, they do often send notices about, well, you know, you say you're this, or you have a license. I mean, I've had a client where someone he had an occupation that needed a license, so I think a security guard even, or something, I forget. And they said, well, you know, based on our economic statistics, you know, security guards, and I'm just making this up, security guards make so much, and you haven't filed your tax return, and your tax return has a lot less, please explain. So California can get into the mix that way too. But the basic way that they can figure it out is a lifestyle type of reconstruction. You know, how have you been able to make your lifestyle? So anyway, just to simplify it, when people come in and they say, where should I start? Like I said, the two main questions we get is, where do I start? And is it okay to report the assets that I've paid for prior to this? My normal advice is to start now. Start now. I don't know, Henry might, and other lawyers and other people might urge, go back a year, 2, 3. I find that a little arbitrary. I kind of say, start now. And I think if you polled people, professionals, CPAs and attorneys, I don't think you'd find that many people who say they're going to find you if you start filing now. So I think that's a pretty safe advice. And then the other question is, should I put down on my tax return, you know, the assets? I've heard stories, third hand, fourth hand, I don't know if they're true, where it's like, when they audit you, they say, you know, explain how you paid for that. I've heard that exists, so maybe, I think Henry and I talked about this, maybe you might go back. If you have an asset, you know, if you're going to put down, you know, your home or your barn, or you know, if you have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment, maybe it would be good to go back a couple of years and file an income tax return that shows where you've made enough profit to buy those things. You know, one more thing I just want to say, and unfortunately, the bad news is all this doesn't quite stop with income taxes. It gets into payroll taxes for your employees. It gets into things that were mentioned on the other panel. It gets into workers' compensation. So it kind of goes on to how small business get regulated. So it doesn't quite stop. And then in this process, in bringing you in from the cold, it could be a shock to everybody about how much it takes.
Well, actually, we might have to disagree on it being okay to just file for the most current return that's delinquent. I come from a pretty strong criminal tax background, and you know, I think that you have to go back at least a few years, because if you haven't filed for a number of years and then you just show up and file a return, especially if there's been a break, they get that return and they think, wow, where's Hank Levy been for the last 7 years? He just filed a return. He must have been doing something for those 6 years. Maybe we ought to go talk to Hank. And so I kind of think it's better to go back a few years because I think it's a safer practice. But you know, I think like many things, you know, as a lawyer, you have to tell your client it's a duty to file all the delinquent returns that you haven't filed. And some of them may follow your advice and just do one, or they may go back a couple of years. But in any event, to handle questions and to let Heather and Joe have a chance to talk, I'll close by saying that it's better to address this sooner than later, because it's never going to get better on its own. And secondly, I want to make sure that you all understand that if you haven't filed tax returns and the IRS shows up and starts to want to talk to you about that, you should absolutely not say anything. They're not there to help you. The IRS special agents are very well trained. They're not like the police officers. These guys have been, you know, hey, I just got a couple questions. It's probably no big deal. You can stop whenever you want. You also can have a lawyer whenever you want. But why don't we start and see, and you can do whatever, you know. And then they throw you a couple low balls. Don't get sucked in. Get a lawyer right away, and just hope for the best outcome you can get. Thank you.
I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm Heather Burke. I'm a cannabis constitutional lawyer. I do primarily state and federal criminal defense. Lately, a lot more fed than state, which is unfortunate because the state has been chilling out in some ways in their enforcement, but the feds, not that they're chilling out, there's still actually a lot of criminal prosecutions, but people aren't doing custody in the same way that they are in the federal system. Many of our clients are still looking at 5, 10, 20 years in the federal system in custody for a plan. So the Fed stuff is like really intense. And you know, one thing, as our clients are still, and our people, our family are still actually looking at being placed in a cage for cannabis, one of the things that I noticed all the way out, not to be too hippie about it, but the people that are doing custody are the people who aren't righteous, right? The people who are not having righteousness in their dealings. They are sending cannabis across state lines, and not that that is actually anything that's inherently wrong. It is criminal, but what is inherently wrong is when they say, oh, it's got pesticides, who cares, it's going to the East Coast, right? That's their subordinate on being malum in se, something that is inherently wrong inside of us, whereas cannabis distribution across state lines is malum prohibitum. It is only prohibited by law, but not because it is something that is wrong. Like robbery is always going to be wrong. Pesticides on medicine that you send to people maybe using this medicinally, that is wrong, right? People off, short-changing people, using other practices that aren't good faith, best practices in what you do, that's wrong. And, you know, I'll protect you anyways, but not pro bono. That's dangerous. You know, so, you know, that's the one thing I want to get through, and it gets really complicated when we get into like extraction business. You know, it starts to get more complicated, but one thing that should ring true in everything that you do and everybody that you do it with, be righteous. And that's all I'll say for now.
So the title of this panel is How to Operate a Cannabis Business in a Changing Landscape. And I think really just the bottom line is that things are changing. This is no longer going to be this very nebulous, unregulated gray area where you kind of have like sort of a defense to criminal charges, but kind of not really, but no one really says what's okay. That time's coming to an end. What we have coming up here is a period where Sacramento is likely going to be attempting to regulate medical cannabis, and that's going to be just before we have legalization happening in 2016. Regardless of which one actually ends up controlling, I think what's going to end up happening is legalization is going to preempt the medical regulatory framework that comes out of Sacramento. But either way, you're going to have to comply with regulations, right? That means that you're going to have to form entities. That means that you're going to have to pay taxes. That means that you're going to have to pay to the BOE, the EBD, Franchise Tax Board. That means that there's going to be a whole fabric of regulations that you're going to have to navigate in order to remain in the cannabis industry. So as you're thinking about how your lives are impacted by what you see here today, I think that's like a really good conceptual place to start from, which is that it's not going to be just you having a piece of paper from a doctor that allows you to cultivate for you and everybody in your collective for an unlimited amount, for an unspecified period of time, for however much you think subjectively that you should have. I think that would be awesome if that were the case, but that's not really a workable regulatory model. What's going to end up happening is that for a lot of the people that are here, a lot of the people that are in the industry, there's going to be permitting and licensure. And initially what's going to happen probably is there's going to be a period of provisional licensing for existing medical cannabis operators to have first crack at adult use 21 and over type of system. So what that means, if you have a retail storefront dispensary, maybe you have the opportunity for your permit from the locality to assist you in getting that first type of provisional license. But for a lot of you, for a lot of the people in Sonoma County, for the cultivators, right, the people in the North Coast, these are going to be, I think, really difficult times to try to traverse. And what that means is that you're going to have to start thinking about incorporating your collective as something like a nonprofit mutual benefit or a consumer cooperative. And you're going to have to think about meeting with somebody like Henry to talk about what your tax liability is in terms of your criminal liability, so that he can refer you to somebody like Hank, so he can go through and get you current on your numbers, because probably what's going to happen is it's going to be demonstrating that you are a good operator, that you are righteous, right? That you are doing what you need to be doing, that is going to give you the ability to be successful in the new paradigm. And so those are my main thoughts for you, right? So obviously call me, call Hank, call Henry, call Heather, but really think about where you plan on fitting in once the paradigm changes, and then move from there, because I think times are changing, and we're in something like the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world. So there's a lot to go around for everybody, and I think Californians are going to have first opportunities ahead of anybody else. I don't see a time when Colorado is going to come in and usurp or something like that. However, even with the head start that we may be able to give you in California, it's up to you to decide what you do with it, and to really work on professionalizing whatever it is you have going on. So I think from there, perhaps we could just take a few questions at the conclusion of this panel, if there are any, if that makes sense. Yes.
You're good. Are you okay?
You talked about IRS tax, income tax, but what about the BOE sales tax?
Well, for retailers, there is a sales tax, and you're obligated to collect and pay it over. The BOE, of course, has been much more reasonable in dealing with cannabis retailers than the IRS.
What about seller's permit to a dispensary or whatever?
You mean a wholesale sale?
Yeah.
Okay, what tax are you talking about?
This sounds more like we give a call.
All businesses are required to have a permit, a seller's permit. But a wholesale business, like a cultivator, wouldn't have to pay sales tax.
That's right.
Okay.
So recently we were working with an indoor grower, and he was selling a bunch of wholesale to dispensaries, and then he decided to get on the up and up with the BOE, and they got him on a technicality, he claims, where he didn't have a certain sheet filled out properly, and they got him on like $29,000 in back taxes. So you guys know anything about that? Or?
You know, that's kind of a fact-specific
Right.
question. I'd have to, we'd have to have more information to address that. But look, the sad reality is, and I'm not a big fan of lawyers, but you're going to need to get legal advice for a lot of these things because it is complicated out there, and there are strategies. And Joe mentioned the Mutual Benefit Corporation. Actually, I think people are now looking at B corporations, the social purpose corporations, as something that's a good alternative for our industry. So I would encourage that as one of the alternatives.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
So for people who are filing back taxes, do you file Schedule Schedule C or Schedule F? And what do you describe their operation being? Is it farming?
Well, yeah, if you're in agriculture, why wouldn't you say you're in agriculture? And yes, I mean, if you're a sole proprietor and it's a Schedule C, that's your business.
Or Schedule F, if you're farming. Sure.
Farming.
They're pretty similar, the tax.
Yeah.
And there's some special rules for farming.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But if you're not a handyman, don't claim handyman.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a lot.
He thought you were being
Yeah, we don't,
facetious.
yeah, I totally agree with what Joe just said. I don't advocate putting something down that's completely not true. But you don't have to say, don't use the word marijuana or cannabis or, put down some innocuous thing that's true, but it's not slamming you in the face with it.
In the concept of local and state regulation and taxation, how do you see this going about when you have out-of-state corporations that are coming in onto Indian reservations and doing a completely, workaround that is happening right now on rancheria outside of Ukiah?
I'm not going to answer.
Well, I think one thing that's interesting
Yeah, I mean, that's-
the United States Department of Justice recently issued a memorandum, a policy directive, saying that they were going to treat Indian reservations like they were the states under the Cole memo, so that the Indian reservations can now sort of distribute cannabis, cultivate, and distribute cannabis in the way that the states are allowed to and the feds are supposed to lay off. And so, for one, I kind of think it's awesome. I don't know that it's that great in terms of, that some of these corporations or groups that are coming in from outside the state of California, are going to make a lot of money. I don't really know about that minutia of it, but I love the fact that Indian reservations are being treated as sovereign nations, so like states are sovereigns, and getting that power, and that they're able to use that to bring more cannabis into the world. So I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. I think that I see it as a good thing and honoring the reservations of these separate tribes that are separate nations. And, we live in a capitalist society, so if the tribes want to bring in a corporation from out of state, maybe our statewide corporations should up their game and show up with a better business plan. And, that's the capitalist system that we live in.
So,
I just want to say there are some beneficial, sovereign nations aren't subject to tax law, federal tax law, so that is going to benefit them. In terms of wholesaler, cultivator, that will be one issue. Retailing will be huge because they're not subject to the 280E issues either.
yeah, but that's only if they're selling it on a reservation. And actually, I think your comment might have been more addressed to these guys that are coming in and building these mega greenhouses. And I guess I don't really have a good answer to address that because it's very new. And it's something that we're just going to see. Although I was invited to meet with some of the tribal guys, I think it's in July sometime, so I might get some more information from that. But this is an example of the industry sticking together. They can grow as much pot as they want in those greenhouses, but who are they going to sell it to? We should take care of our own first.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the only thing I'd add to that is it's never happened before. No one knows what's going to happen. I think part of your question also is how does locality interface in terms of getting a revenue stream from these foreign entities that get to essentially just plop down in their jurisdiction while being outside of their jurisdiction in many ways, right? I don't know. I mean, this is brand new. We're watching it evolve for the very first time. We haven't ever had that before. And so I suspect that the locality is going to find an opportunity to get the revenue stream, right? Because if you have this rancheria outside of Ukiah, the cannabis has to come in and out of there somehow, right? So you can imagine a vindictive locality having sheriff's deputies follow cars in and out of there and pulling people over for violations of state law and having an intervention that way. I don't know if that's going to happen, but there are different ways that this could play out, and I think we're all just trying to watch and see what happens.
It's very interesting.
Okay, I have a question. I'm Jonathan from the Sonoma Independent. We did a story on called "Stop Incarcerating Parents for Victimless Marijuana Crimes," and there was this petition with like 1,300 names. And I also wrote about it for the Huffington Post about a fellow named Yarrow Kubrick who went to jail, but for running afoul of the technical laws of a legal grow when he tried to do legal banking. And he made a comment that I just wanted to put to you, which is sort of like the big $64,000 question, I guess, which is, they told us to come out of the shadows, in a sense, as a grower. And his advice now to people is, given the federal, intervention, the interpretation of the federal banking laws, and given the district attorney in Sonoma County District, Bill Ravish's desire to prosecute for guns or for technical violations, he said, and my advice to other people is stay in the shadows. Don't come out of the shadows. Don't try to be legal, because this is what happens when you try. How do you respond to that? Where are you at with that? Is this the time for people to, what would you say to growers who say, we've got to stay undercover, until we see that it's safe to come out?
I mean, so my thought.
Everybody's going to want to say something.
Yeah.
I mean, so generally, like you're talking about where we are as a community, right? Where we are as a society, and I think that we're in the process of entropy. The toothpaste is not going back in the tube, right? And so we are in a difficult place because federally cannabis is still considered a Schedule I controlled substance with no medical value whatsoever. On a state level, all you have is a series of affirmative defenses that you can raise to criminal charges. So cultivation of even a single plant is still a felony in the state of California. And it's the same crime to have one plant as it is to have 1 million plants. And the determination as to whether or not to prosecute that one plant or that 1 million plants is solely within the purview of the local district attorney, right? So as your question relates to Sonoma County, I do a lot of criminal work here in Sonoma County, and the prosecution regime is still alive and well. The machine is still grinding people away for having very marginal amounts of cannabis, and people in that situation often believe that they are in compliance with state and local law. But there is often a disconnect as to what people subjectively believe themselves and whether or not they're actually in compliance. And so essentially, just because you have a doctor's recommendation, that means that you can use cannabis therapeutically. And just because the Sonoma County guidelines permit you to have 30 plants within 100 square feet of canopy, that doesn't mean that if you aggregate dozens of different recommendations together, that a sheriff's deputy is going to walk away from a 500 plant grow, for example. When you have situations interjected into the mix, such as children, such as firearms, such as other drugs, such as large amounts of currency, such as bad statements evidencing diversion, such as issues related to money laundering, where there is a recordation of deposits of in excess of $5,000 of deposits being deposited into a bank account within a 7-day time period, that conduct alone being a distinct standalone felony, it can be very, very tricky and very complicated in that you can have a situation essentially where the cannabis component of any given case can actually be the most mitigating part. That, yeah, the issue isn't whether or not they had 100 plants, but it's the fact that they have those firearms next to those kids, next to all that cash, and they don't really have income tax records to demonstrate that they're actually like normal citizens, a part of the community, you know? So I guess the short answer is that every case is like a snowflake, and every case is different. I can't speak as to what happened to that individual, and I don't think that anybody should go beyond what their comfort level is in terms of visibility. But the reality is that if you are involved in the cannabis industry, the more that you're able to demonstrate regulatory compliance, the safer that you are. The more that you're able to document that the cultivation that you're a part of is legitimate, as evidenced by articles of incorporation, by tax records, by having registered with the Board of Equalization, etc. All of those things go into the totality of the circumstance analysis that cop is initially going to be utilizing when they're at your site. And then also what the DAs can be reviewing when they look at the police reports to determine whether or not there's probable cause to charge a case. And then that's what a judge and a jury, if a case progresses, is going to look at as well. And so to answer your question, what should somebody be doing? Should they be acting like it's 1989 and there's no medical cannabis laws? Of course not, that's ridiculous, right? Should people decide outside the comfort zone that they are going to be at the forefront and that they are going to be the squeaky wheel, that they are going to be that nail sticking out of the plank of wood that gets hammered? Maybe not, if that's not where they want to be. But demonstrating regulatory compliance, being in compliance with the laws as they exist, and Sonoma County does have fairly good laws relative to other places that have bans or just a circumstance that is less workable than Sonoma County. If you can work within the system, that's what you need to do if you want to move forward. But those are my thoughts.
I have no stories of anybody that I've helped to be compliant being punished for it. That's the bottom line. I mean, I had one client, a delivery service in Burbank, where the driver got arrested, and the police came to visit me because they traveled up from Burbank because the lawyer was a criminal lawyer, sort of an old-fashioned guy, didn't want to give them any records. And so, you know, what's my lessons? You know, comply, be compliant. I've been trained. I'm trained to help people be compliant, so that's my job.
And that's not going to diminish. Going forward, there's not going to be a circumstance where you're going to need to comply less. What the federal government says they want in the Cole memo is like a really sort of strict and transparent regulatory regime, and that feeds their determination as to whether or not they're going to intervene in cannabis prosecutions. The reason why Heather's so busy is because California doesn't have statewide regulations. There's no statewide regulating agency. And so you're going to end up busier in federal court here, especially in the Eastern District where Heather practices, than you're going to have in other places that have more transparent licensing process and regulatory regime.
I think one thing to be aware of too, like, you know, some of the people that are wanting to come out of the shadows as activists or, you know, whatever it means to come out of the shadows, you know, folks who are maybe buying recommendations from people they don't know. They are shipping their cannabis across state lines. They're giving their cannabis, they don't care who it goes to, they're using pesticides, you know what I mean? So, I mean, some of those, they are having cannabis around kids, they're having guns around kids, they're having large stacks of cash around kids. You know, and so there are some people that may not want to come out of those shadows. And, you know, more power to them. I would not suggest those folks come and get in front of the cameras. You know, and sometimes I'm shocked at the folks who are willing to get on TV and talk about what they're doing, which is, you know, stuff that might actually get them in trouble. But those folks, you know, the mom and poppers, the craft cultivators, who are being wise with their money, who are being wise with this, you know, very powerful herb. Those people are not the folks that even the local DAs are coming out against for the most part. You know, as cannabis right now is default illegal. It is illegal in federally per se. It is illegal in California state law unless it is exempted. It is only exempted or justified through the medical cannabis recommendation or medical cannabis related conduct. You know, so the default is always going to be illegal. And until we shift that over to where the default is legal and you have to prove otherwise, Like if you are growing too many artichokes, at some point they might come and say, hey, this isn't personal artichoke growing anymore. This is commercial conduct and you need to have your artichoke license or whatever it is. You know, when we get to cannabis, to where the default is legal, then maybe more people can start to come out of the shadows. You know, but for now there is some wisdom to it, and I generally advise my clients, if you are like, know you're a criminal and you're down with that, you want to be a criminal, which some people do. You know, they think it's cool. You know, a lot of people too, it's like the mindset. We were raised like that as kids. Cannabis was a crime, and some of it is heavy mind play, you know, and brainwash that this is a criminal activity. So some people want to stay in that sort of genre. They think it's cool, it's something they get off on, I don't know what, but like those people maybe, yeah, don't. But there's like 100 to 1 of those who do want to come out of the shadows, you know, who do want to have like good work, who have a good product, who have a great work ethic. They're not doing this so that they can go do like, you know, a bunch of drugs in another country for 8 months out of the year. You know, they want to like have lives and have families and be present in our community and be giving back. Those are the people I think generally have more safety when they do come out. And not to be like a total hippie about it, but I am a total hippie, so I can't really be anything else. But like there is something about the energy of that, right? Like the energy of coming forward with like something that we know is awesome versus the energy of coming, you know, forward with something that we're like, oh my God, this is so bad, I'm so bad. You know, that's not what we're presenting anymore, right? We're not presenting something that's bad, we're presenting something that's really good, and we want to share with the world. And so I think those are the folks that can come forward. And in that way, when you're coming forward, if you have some like, you know, I tell my clients a lot, like if you have that feeling in the pit of your stomach that what you're doing is illegal, you know, it might be illegal. So like, think about that, you know, and then when it comes to cannabis, we're like operating in a rapidly changing environment. The business aspect is rapidly changing, you know, and we don't know what to advise our clients some way. It's like, what do you do in this? Well, so I generally give my clients the options. This is what you could do here, and this is your liability: arrest, civil nuisance abatement, you know, federal intervention. This is your liability if you go this way, and it's up to you. It's a risk, reward, a cost-benefit sort of analysis these days. And that is on the person that's doing that kind of conduct, you know. But one thing's going to be true when we have no regulation or we don't have enough good regulation is that best practices are always going to rule the day. So if we don't know what it is because the landscape is changing legally, what is always going to be a constant in business? Acting with good faith, acting with best practices. And so those are some ways that if you are willing to come out of the shadows, that you're going to be in a much safer position.
Yeah, and one caveat I'd like to just add to that is be careful about who you interact with and associate with, you know, both in your business lives and also your professional lives, right? So if you go to your doctor and your doctor for every person says that you can have 20 pounds of cannabis regardless of the condition, regardless of the circumstances of that patient, you probably don't want to go to that doctor. And the reason why is because downstream, if there is a problem and there's a law enforcement intervention and you go to court, that recommendation may not hold up. And so when I go to criminal court, routinely I have to deal with recalcitrant doctors that sign recommendations that don't want to be part of it. There's currently a doctor down in Southern California that has a Sonoma County $5,000 bench warrant out for him because he won't stand up for the piece of paper that he gave my client. It's quality, not quantity, and that goes with the members of your collectives as well. If you have a cultivation site, and that cultivation site has just piles and piles and piles of pieces of paper that are other people's recommendations that you don't know and don't really have any association with the collective whatsoever, then that's not going to really help you. What's going to help you is actually having members of your collective that are a part of the collective. They don't have to all participate in the cultivation. They don't have to do anything like that. Merely just paying for the cannabis to reimburse for the cost is sufficient, really, in addition to the membership agreements. And so don't worry about trying to get as many recommendations as you can, or don't worry about going to the one doctor that's going to give you the biggest recommendation that exists. That doesn't help you. And the same exists for other professionals. There's a million attorneys out there that say that they do cannabis work. There's a million CPAs that say they do that, and largely they're hacks. And just be careful of that, because this is a gold rush time, and in this period of gold rush, just like anything else, that brings out a lot of bad actors, including professionals. So as you decide how you're going to navigate this, really be diligent in researching who you're going to work with, both in terms of other operators and professionals, and then just trust your judgment in having good people help you and move forward that way.
Okay, I think we may have gotten a little off track here, but let me just make a couple, just 30 seconds. We'll give you time, don't worry. Okay, well, first of all, I think that you should be proud of what you do, and you shouldn't be timid about it. If you're doing it correctly, you can speak out, and nothing bad is going to happen to you. Nothing's happened to Harborside. Nothing's happened to Steve D'Angelo, who we all owe a debt of gratitude because he got out there, he got up front, and he's never backed down. And let's not lose sight of the fact that we are becoming a political force. And if the DA isn't treating us fairly, we don't get him reelected. We get our own candidate reelected. Sheriffs run for election. All these people are answering to us as the citizens. And if we don't like what they're doing, it's up to us to do something about it. And we are now strong enough to send that message loud and clear.
And it's still
I promised you some.
John Suggs, Sonoma Patient Group. I'd like for you to elaborate on the 280E tax in regards to a small collective or individual grower, how the 280E tax works.
If you want to get Hank and I going on 280E, you're going to have to stay for another 4 hours because that's how long our presentation on that takes. And we've given it across the country. We've given it in Maine. We've given it, at least 10, Washington, where else? Las Vegas, somewhere in Nevada, Arizona. I mean, that's 280E is like is a punitive tax that the services use to the detriment of the cannabis industry. It was never really intended to affect the cannabis industry. For those of you who are not familiar with 280E, it's a little-known section in the Internal Revenue Code that says that if you are engaged in a business that traffics in a controlled substance, you may not deduct your ordinary and necessary business expenses. It doesn't apply to cultivators. It only applies to, well, let's put it this way. They've never used it against cultivators. They've only used it against retail establishments. It's a big problem, and it would be impossible to cover in less than an hour. I'm sorry.
The bottom line is it applies to cultivators, but because of the specifics of its interpretation, it won't harm cultivators. Very much.
Yeah, yes, that's right. It applies, but it's a different, yes, sir.
So if you're doing our tax, if you're working on our taxes as a small collective, you would include the 280E tax.
Absolutely. What you would have to do is have your accountant do a formula to determine which of your expenses are directly related to trafficking, and which of your expenses are related to other items, and then do a division and disallow your 280E expenses. The Champ case is the leading case on this, CHAMP versus Commissioner. Okay. Yes, sir.
So is the tours, off now, or are you guys going to do more of this 280E speaking in other places?
Well, we're happy to do it again if there's a need for it, but let's put 280E to rest. There were some sympathetic congressmen that are trying to figure out a way to legislate around it, and I think there were certain amendments in the Senate, in Congress now, that want to say that 280E does not apply in states where the state recognizes cannabis either medicinally or for adult use. I get what you mean.
Yeah, and by the way, Henry did that Champ case. He was being modest. That main one, he did that. So so talk to him really like these are your guys when it comes to tax issues. Call them.
And more fun is coming up later this year.
Okay.
Well, anything else? No, that's it. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you, everybody.
All right, that one.
Oh, wait.